I was standing in the kitchen, staring at a bank notification that didn't make sense, when my wife asked me if I wanted pasta or rice for dinner. She didn't look nervous. She didn't pause. She didn't even turn around. Just kept rinsing something in the sink like the world was still stable. The notification wasn't small. It wasn't ambiguous. It was a transfer confirmation for a loan I didn't remember approving, tied to an account that technically had my name on it, but didn't feel like mine anymore. I said nothing. I watched her shoulders as she worked. Counted the seconds between the faucet turning on and off. Not because I suspected her, at least not consciously, but because something about the timing felt rehearsed. Like she'd asked that exact question to keep the air filled. I told her pasta was fine. My voice sounded normal. That scared me more than the notification. She nodded, still facing the sink, and said she'd already started boiling water. The pot was cold. I noticed because I walked over and touched the handle, pretending to look for something else. That night, we ate together like always. Same plates. Same quiet clinks of forks. She told me about a coworker's dog getting sick. I laughed in the right places. I even reached for her hand at one point, just to check if it still felt familiar. It did. And that was the problem, because somewhere between the first bite and the last, I realized I wasn't trying to understand the transfer. I was trying to decide whether I wanted to know what it meant. We'd been married long enough that our routines ran on muscle memory. Morning coffee poured before either of us spoke. Bills paid on alternating months without discussion. Weekends divided into errands and recovery. From the outside, it probably looked balanced. From the inside, it felt efficient. I used to think that was the same thing. When we met, she liked to joke that I was stable. Not exciting. Not flashy. Just stable. I took it as a compliment. I had a steady job, decent credit, and no appetite for chaos. She was different. Smart, observant, always tracking 3 things at once. She noticed details I missed, remembered dates I forgot, handled paperwork with a kind of quiet confidence that impressed me. Early on, she took over anything financial. Not aggressively. Just naturally. She'd say things like, "I'm better at this stuff," or "You hate forms anyway." Both were true. I let her. It felt like teamwork. We didn't fight about money. That was something I was proud of. Friends complained about hidden purchases or secret accounts. We had transparency, or at least I thought we did. We shared passwords. Shared calendars. Shared plans that stretched years ahead. Buying a place. Traveling later. Maybe kids. Once things felt more settled, that night after dinner, she fell asleep on the couch halfway through a show we'd already seen. Her head rested on my shoulder, her breathing slow and even. I didn't move. I watched the dark TV screen reflect us faintly. I remember thinking how peaceful it looked. How earned it felt. Then my phone buzzed again. Not another alert. Just a reminder she'd set weeks earlier. Call the advisor tomorrow. I stared at it longer than I should have. I couldn't remember asking her to set that reminder, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd spoken to an advisor at all. The next morning, I didn't call anyone. I made coffee, answered emails, and left the reminder sitting on my screen like it would expire on its own. She kissed me on the cheek before work, told me she'd be late, and reminded me, casually, that the advisor was expecting my call. That wording stuck. Expecting. I asked her which advisor. She didn't hesitate. Gave a name I recognized, someone we'd spoken to once years ago about consolidating student loans. She even mentioned a detail from that meeting, something about interest rates that sounded accurate enough to shut down my skepticism. I nodded. I didn't press. Pressing would have required admitting I was uneasy, and I wasn't ready to give that unease a voice. Throughout the day, I found myself replaying small moments from our marriage. Not dramatic ones. Mundane ones. Her asking me to sign things quickly because a deadline was tight. Her insisting we file jointly even when I suggested keeping certain accounts separate. Her habit of speaking in plurals. We decided, we agreed, even when I didn't remember the conversation. None of it had felt wrong at the time. It felt like trust. Like delegation. Like love expressed through efficiency. When I got home, there was a folder on the table. Neatly labeled. My name in her handwriting. Inside were copies of documents I half recognized and others I didn't at all. She told me she was organizing things and thought I'd want to see how well positioned we were. I flipped through slowly, making approving noises. Numbers blurred together. What I noticed instead were the margins, notes in her pen, arrows pointing to signatures, dates circled in red. I realized I'd signed most of these. Or at least, something like them. I asked her when she'd put the folder together. She smiled and said, over time. Not recently. Not today. Just over time. That night, I lay awake next to her, listening to her breathe, trying to remember when our finances had stopped feeling shared and started feeling curated. I couldn't find the moment. That scared me more than any document could. I started noticing how often she spoke for me, not in public arguments or dramatic moments. In quiet places. Phone calls on speaker. Conversations with people who handled paperwork. She'd answer questions before I could, using my name like a tool. He prefers fixed rates. He's fine with extending the term. Each time, she'd glance at me afterward, checking for resistance. I gave none. At first, I told myself it was efficiency. She processed faster than I did. That had always been true. But efficiency started to feel like momentum I couldn't interrupt without causing a scene. A week after the folder appeared, I logged into our shared financial dashboard on my own. I hadn't done that in years. The password worked. That almost disappointed me. I'd half expected it to be changed. What I found wasn't chaos. It was order. Clean categories. Timelines. Long-term projections that stretched decades forward. Everything looked intentional. That should have been reassuring. Instead, I felt like I was walking through a house I technically owned but didn't recognize. There were debts I didn't remember discussing. Not massive, but layered. Strategically placed. There were transfers between accounts that served no obvious purpose except movement. And there were notes, internal comments, attached to certain transactions. Most were neutral. A few used language I didn't like. Buffer. Temporary shelter. Protected window. I told myself these were standard terms. Professional jargon. Still, I copied them down. That night, I asked her, casually, why we were carrying certain balances when we could pay them off. She didn't get defensive. She smiled, like she'd been waiting for the question. She explained it slowly, patiently, as if to a client. Talked about leverage, credit positioning, long-term strategy. She reminded me that everything was in our name. That nothing was hidden. I nodded. Again, but when she said, "This protects us," I realized she never clarified from what, and when I asked, she kissed my forehead and said, "From instability." She fell asleep minutes later. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when stability had started sounding like a threat. The next few days, I tried to ignore it. I buried myself in work, in errands, in anything that felt normal. But little things kept creeping up, little inconsistencies I couldn't shake. Emails she'd CC'd me on but I didn't remember seeing. Bills paid earlier than planned, with annotations I hadn't made. Even the grocery lists began to feel curated, not random, not collaborative, but like someone had anticipated every impulse before I had it. One evening, I found a set of documents tucked behind the kitchen cabinet. Not hidden aggressively, but intentionally out of reach. They weren't labeled, not official, just handwritten notes. My handwriting mixed with hers. I flipped through them quickly. Scanning for context. Names, account numbers, instructions I didn't remember authorizing. At first, I thought it was an old system we'd abandoned, something outdated. Then I saw a note, ensure he never notices withdrawals under 500. My heart skipped. I reread it. And again. No context. No explanation. Just that line. I confronted her, my voice low, careful. I said, "I found these notes. Why does it say that?" She tilted her head, almost amused. You read them wrong, she said. It's just a way to track transfers. I thought it would make it easier for you. I wanted to believe her. I tried to. But the word never lingered. Never notice. Later, I caught her on a call, quietly arguing with someone I didn't recognize. Not angry. Calm, measured, almost polite. I overheard phrases like "we need to protect the account," and "his name must remain untouchable." I told myself it was business. Purely business. She handled clients like this all the time. But that evening, as she leaned against the doorway, sipping wine, smiling at me, I realized I didn't know which part of my life was business anymore, and which part was hers. A week later, I thought I had answers. I found an envelope in her nightstand, sealed but not locked. I hesitated, heart pounding, then opened it. Inside were copies of legal documents, contracts, and letters, proof that she had been planning something far more calculated than I'd imagined. At first glance, it looked incriminating. There were clauses about asset protection, agreements with financial advisors I didn't remember meeting, and references to a business I'd never heard of. My mind raced. My stomach turned. I felt like a fool for trusting her, for being blind. I confronted her. I laid the papers out on the table, voice trembling, trying to maintain control. What is all this? Why didn't I know? She sighed, rubbing her temples. I wanted to protect us, she said, her tone steady. Everything I've done was to keep our life secure. There were risks I couldn't explain until now. It sounded plausible. Too plausible. My anger softened. I began to convince myself I had overreacted. Maybe she'd been working behind the scenes for our future. Maybe all those late nights, all the phone calls, all the meticulous planning had been a gift I didn't understand. We spent the night talking in fragments, her explaining terms, me nodding, trying to catch up. By the end of it, I felt reassured, almost grateful. My chest unclenched. I started to believe I had misread her silence, her control. Her secrecy, yet, as I went to bed, I couldn't shake a small, stubborn doubt. Something in the way she smiled, the way she casually moved the papers back into the envelope, felt too rehearsed. I told myself it was paranoia, but part of me, buried deep, couldn't stop replaying a question. If everything was about protection, why did it always feel like I was being protected from myself? A few nights later, I couldn't sleep again. Something was nagging at me, a quiet tension that no explanation could soothe. I got up and wandered into the office, the envelope from the nightstand tucked under my arm. I spread the documents across the desk, scanning for anything I might have missed, and then I noticed it, a recurring pattern, subtle but unmistakable. Transfers labeled as protected didn't go to banks or advisors. They went to her personal accounts, accounts she never mentioned. The legal papers weren't for joint asset protection. They were shields, redirections, and camouflage. The more I traced, the clearer it became. Our entire financial life, everything I thought we shared, had been curated to benefit her exclusively, while keeping me oblivious. I felt frozen. My fingers hovered over the papers. I thought about the small signs I'd ignored, the notes, the transfers under 500, her controlled explanations. Every act of care had been part of a design I hadn't understood. I confronted her again, this time in the living room, the documents laid bare between us. She didn't flinch. She didn't deny it. She just looked at me with that familiar calm, that practiced warmth, and said, "I'm protecting my future. That doesn't make it wrong." Her words struck harder than anger. It wasn't about deception for chaos. It was precise, calculated, deliberate. Every touch, every word, every quiet act had been a tool to ensure I never questioned her until she chose. I realized I'd married her thinking love and trust were intertwined. But for her, trust was just a mechanism. Love, a convenient mask, and in that silence, staring at her, I understood the truth. I hadn't been married to a person who loved me. I had been married to a person who loved the life I made possible. The days after that confrontation were quiet, unnervingly quiet. I went through the motions of life, work, meals, even conversation, but everything felt filtered through a new lens. Every laugh, every glance, every casual touch now carried a weight I couldn't shake. I tried talking to her, testing the waters. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked one night, voice low. She shrugged, as if the question was naive. "You never asked the right way," she said. "I thought I was protecting you, from stress, from mistakes, from uncertainty. You'd have panicked." I wanted to scream, to storm out, to dismantle everything she had built. But a part of me, the part that loved routine, stability, and the illusion of partnership, wanted to understand. To forgive. To rebuild what I thought was ours. I started watching her closely again, noticing tiny details, the way she budgeted, the way she calculated risk, the way she controlled information. Every moment revealed intention, precision, and calculation. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't careless. She was meticulous. And I wasn't included, except as a performer in a carefully scripted play. I can't decide what hurt more, the deception or the truth that I had been complicit in ignoring the signs. We still live together. We still eat dinner at the same table. We still share routines. She smiles. I respond. The house is calm. Efficient, almost peaceful, and yet, I lie awake most nights, thinking about the life I thought we had and the life that never existed. Somewhere deep down, I know she will never see this as betrayal. She sees it as strategy, and I don't know if I will ever see it as anything else.